Revolutionize your knife making with a grinding jig. Or not. Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, everything you wanted to know about this little tool, the knife grinding jig. So you want to make a knife. Maybe you tried grinding one on a belt grinder and it kind of sucked. Or you just want to do it better, faster, easier. The answer may be a grinding jig. So I've done quite a few videos about knife grinding jigs over the years, but I've never done one that's just a comprehensive overview of grinding jigs. What they are, how they can help you make knives, and how to use them. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's start with the what. This right here is a knife. This part right here is the bevel. Now, a trained monkey can grind the profile of the knife on a belt grinder. That's the exterior part here. Totally easy. But getting from, this profiled thing to this bevel part, not so easy. So a jig is a little gizmo that helps you to grind the bevels to a consistent angle by holding the knife in a fixed orientation to the platen of the belt grinder. Like so. Slap it on the table, jam it into the belt, boom, perfect bevel. Well, not so fast, cowboy. Advantages? Sure. First, for beginners, it takes less skill to use a jig than to grind freehand. Again, more on that later. Second, they allow you to grind precisely the same angle on both sides of the blade, helping to create symmetry in the blade without a whole lot of fussing. Third, a jig can help you grind an angle that's consistent across the entire face of the blade, making for a more pleasing appearance of this grind line here that runs along the top of the blade. Fourth, jigs help you work faster because they take less skill to get the same effect. And fifth, they absorb heat so you don't have to constantly cool your blade as you grind. Again, another speed advantage. In order for a jig to do its job, it has to consistently maintain the blade at a particular angle. And it has to hold the knife somehow. And yeah, that's about it. Also, you can make them adjustable if you want. Don't have to, but you can. The simplest jig is a fixed jig. This one is milled out of a block of steel. Basically, there's a little shelf at the bottom and the knife rests there. No adjustment required. It always grinds the exact same angle. Most jigs, though, are adjustable. On this commercially manufactured jig, for instance, you loosen these two screws and you can change the angle on the face. Finally, you need to be able to firmly and repeatably anchor a blade to the jig. This one uses magnets. This one uses a high-tech approach called a welding clamp. Some guys make jigs with zillions of drilled and tapped holes so you can screw the blades on. Some have little clip thingies. There are a ton of different ways of doing it. Each has its advantages and disadvantages, including rigidity, repeatability, cost, setup time, flexibility, and so on. If you want the ultimate in repeatability, screws are good. Each blade's going to fit in exactly the same place every single time, but it takes a lot more time to put it on and take it off. If you make a lot of the same blade shape and you have the equipment, you can mill a fixed jig to mate perfectly with a particular blade shape. Here's one I use for my X model folder. Again, very repeatable. The more production-oriented you are, the more repeatability and speed become important. If you're mostly making one-offs, then flexibility and adjustability are the most important qualities. And rigidity is always good, as long as it doesn't get so heavy that it drags on the table. So if you're thinking about buying or making a jig, which one's best? Well, as in almost all things, it depends. Basically, I would break jig users into three different categories. So first, you've got beginners. Second, you've got hobbyists or custom makers who make a lot of different sizes and shapes of knives. And third, you've got more production-oriented guys who are making repeated versions of more or less the same knife. If you're a beginner, you can buy a simple jig or make one. There are tons of videos online that show various designs, including my own. I'd go for flexibility and simplicity and cheapness. Something like the one that I made in a recent video. Link in the cards. If you're a hobbyist or someone making a wide range of more custom type blades, I'd focus on adjustability and rigidity. I wouldn't use the types made out of door hinges and that sort of thing that would have a tendency to be a little wobbly. Finally, if you're a production guy, I'd consider making jigs that are purpose-built for particular knives. That way, you never have to screw around resetting the jig to a different angle and maybe not getting it quite right. Okay, so let's talk about how to use a jig. First, setup. Now, most grinders have a table that's adjustable in some way or other. This one that I made for my grinder isn't adjustable per se, but it has a little play, and so it doesn't always sit dead square. So before I do anything with my table, I always check to make sure that it's absolutely dead square to the platen. Easy to do using the machinist square. If I don't verify squareness, I might start on a knife, do something else, mess around with it, come back thinking I've got the exact same angle, and then screw it up because I reset the table or it shifted or whatever. Don't want that happening. Obviously, if you have a table that's permanently fixed and never moves and you don't adjust it, don't waste your time on this step. Once you're sure that everything's square, you need to set your angle for the jig. Now, every jig adjusts in a different way, but here you'll see me setting this one using these adjustment screws. I like to know what angle I'm using, so these little $25 angle finders are very helpful. That way, if you make two versions of a knife, you don't have to reinvent the wheel to figure out what angle you should grind. Set it the same way every time, comes out the same way every time. Incidentally, I get people asking me all the time what angle is best for those bevels, and there's no right answer, unfortunately. Say 5 to 9 degrees off axis. In other words, the included angle would be more like 10 to 18 degrees, but it can vary even beyond that. You really have to gauge it off of the thickness of the blade, the width of the blade, and the intended use. So if you plan on attacking car doors with it, you want a really short, squat design. If you figure on cutting, normal stuff like cardboard boxes or whatever, the steeper the grind, the better it's going to cut. Hey guys, let me jump in here to put in a plug for our sponsor, Combat Abrasives. All the belts I use in this video are from Combat, including their Shredder ceramic belts, which are not only excellent, but are a great value for the price. Combat is a family-owned American company with manufacturing facilities here in the U.S. If you'd like to help the channel and save some money too, click the link to Combat Abrasives in the description and use the coupon code BLADE1 to get a 15% discount on your order. Alright, back to work. Okay, one more preliminary. You're using a belt grinder, so belts matter. When using jigs, you want flat and you want predictable. I find that for what I do, X-weight ceramic belts are both really flat and really predictable. These are Combat Abrasive shredders, but there are plenty of other brands that fit the bill. Why does this matter? Well, some belts will cup a little bit. See how this flexes right at the edge? That means that it'll bite into the knife unpredictably. This can cause the belt to sort of munch its way up into the plunge line here, causing your grind line to sag across the face of the knife. Likewise, some very flexible belts will bulge in the center, which can also cause your grind line to wander. By the way, that doesn't mean these belts are bad or that a skilled guy can't compensate. These are all high quality belts, they just aren't ideal for using in this particular situation. Set yourself up for success by using the right belts. Before I start grinding, I'll scribe the edge with this homemade scribe so that I know how far to grind. Once I've got a particular angle dialed in for a particular type and thickness of knife, I just have to set the angle and I don't have to worry about this. I'll know that as long as my grind lines are right, the thickness will be right too. But you always have to experiment to find what works first. Too steep, and you may end up with a really fat edge. Too shallow, and you may obliterate your edge. So the first time around, scribing lines is the best way to assure that you don't overgrind one side of the blade and end up with scrap metal instead of a knife. If you see that the angle you set is not working as you grind the knife, you can readjust in midstream until you get it right. Alright, so let's show a jig in operation. Here I'll use this fixed jig that I made. But once the angle's set, they all work more or less the same way. I start at the plunge line, that's the longest part of the grind right before you hit the tang. I'm putting just a hair more pressure on the end nearest the grind line. Then I slide the whole thing over smoothly from one end to the other, going all the way out to the point. The key thing here is that I don't just go straight all the way across. That may work for the first few passes, but once I really start laying this thing in, I'll change the angle subtly towards the end. In other words, I'm sort of pulling the handle end toward me so that the grind line follows the curvature of the edge. Let me take a second to make this point. If you think that there's a complete total shortcut to making perfect grinds on a belt grinder and that jigs are the solution, sorry, not the case. It's easier to grind well with a jig than to do it freehand, but this is still a skill. It takes practice. Just getting started at knife grinding? I recommend buying a large batch of 1 inch by 3/16 inch mild steel, maybe even 1/4 inch, the kind of stuff that you can buy at Home Depot as welding steel. Then chop it into short sections and grind a bunch of pretend knives before you waste your efforts on a piece of expensive and fancy knife steel. Even with a jig, it'll save you a ton of time and money and heartache. I recommend starting your grind with something in the 40 grit range. Some people like 36, some people like 40, some people use 60, but for me 40 is sort of the sweet spot. Don't stress if your grind isn't totally perfect at the beginning. Keep adjusting as you go, varying pressure and angles very subtly to smooth everything out. I find that if I really goof, it sometimes helps to start at the tip and work my way backward up towards the plunge line, again using very light pressure. All things being equal though, you want to move very smoothly and deliberately all the way from the plunge line to the tip in one throw. If you hesitate or jiggle or change the angle rapidly, you'll mess up the grind line. Another little trick that'll sometimes help you if you develop a dip or a sag in your grind line is to use just the corner of the belt. Now you have to be very gentle and smooth here or you'll create even worse problems. So let's say this is dead flat on the belt. I'm just coming off that angle by a few degrees. Then smoothly all the way to the end. This will create a rougher grind, but sometimes it'll help even things out. Once you get close to your target grind line, change belts to a higher grit. You might want to go to 60 or even to 120 from here. Experiment and see what works best for you. More often than not, I skip all the way from 40 to 120, but not always. Once you get past 120 grit though, it's really a question of what your final finish is intended to be. You might continue on up to 220, 320, you might even go with structured abrasives. There are just a lot of options depending on whether you're going to tumble it, bead blast it, etch it, polish it, mirror polish it, buff it. Everything takes a different approach and you really have to experiment a little bit. I've got plenty of videos that go into belt choices, so I won't beat that part to death here. The main point here is if you don't have a specific idea in mind of what you're trying to do, experiment with different approaches and see what you like. Another general point is that you may find that you like to ditch the jig on higher grit belts and just do it freehand. Once you have a good grind line and everything's established nice and cleanly, it's much easier to maintain it with high grit belts than it is to establish that grind in the first place. This is kind of a training wheels approach to help you develop your freehand grinding skills so you can establish things with the jig and then practice your freehand grinding once you've got a nice flat bevel there. So, quick summary. Jigs can help a skilled maker speed up his work and maybe increase his quality. And they can help beginners climb that learning curve a little bit faster. Will they turn a rank beginner into a pro overnight? Nope. Think about it this way. You wouldn't expect to throw a perfect curveball for a strike 10 minutes after somebody handed you a baseball for the first time. But will a jig help you get better, faster, with improved quality? Absolutely. So are jigs the end all and be all? Look, honestly, I didn't use jigs for the first 15 years or so of my knife making career. I was totally a freehand guy, and that helped me gain a certain level of mastery over my grinding. It also fit, the type of knives that I had made for most of that period of time. But as I turned to more production type knife making, I started using jigs, and I use them all the time now. So, are jigs for you? Look, they're so easy to make, they're cheap to buy, you might as well try them, and if they work for you, great. Thanks for watching, guys. If you feel like you got something out of this video, don't forget to subscribe. Also, click on the link to Patreon for a great way to give back to the channel. Plus, check me out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Links in the description. If you want something sharp and pointy, maybe a gift for yourself or one of the cooler people in your life, check out my Tactics Armory website and pick up one of our tactical or outdoor knives. And finally, if you want to learn to make Hamones or Japanese swords, check out WalterSorrellsBlades.com, where you can find videos about how I make Hamones, as well as forging, mounting, polishing, and fittings for Japanese swords. Thanks, and see you soon.